Okay, so I have these big, massive lights in front of me, so I can see nobody unless I do this. If you see me doing this, that's why. Okay, so we're here to talk about testing web applications with Playwright. First of all, instead of me doing this, I'm going to ask you to be loud, because you seem like a very nice audience and loud, and that's good. So I'm going to ask you to shout or do whatever, so make noise. If you have heard of Playwright. Amazing. Okay, another one. Who's using Playwright in production? So this is exactly why I'm here. Okay, this is good. So yes, my name is Debbie O'Brien, and everything that she said about me is true. I try to do 3 hours of sport a day. Basically, that happened was I love sport, and then the government locked us up, and then we weren't allowed outside of our apartments to do any walking, sport, nothing. We couldn't leave. So I was in jail, and after 7 weeks of jail, they let us out for 2 hours a day of sport, and then I was like, okay, I am the only one stopping myself from doing sport. So before, I'm doing 12-hour days at the computer, not doing what I want to do, and now it's me that's I get to choose what I want to do in life. So I decided, right, from now on, I'm going to aim for 3 hours sport a day. So if you follow me on Twitter, Debs_O'Brien, you will see me cycling around Mallorca, running, playing paddle. This was me this morning. I went for a beautiful run in your park. Absolutely beautiful weather today in Sweden. And I run everywhere I go. And the reason I'm telling you this is not because I want you to think I'm amazing. I mean, totally cool if you do. I'm telling you this because I really think that it's beneficial if people have a life outside of work. I know we all want to work hard, we want to aim, we want to work in the big companies, you want to get on the stage, but you do not have to do 12-hour days to get there. Make sure you're taking time out of your life to do sport or, water the plants, feed the dog, walk the dog, whatever it is that makes you happy. But seriously, work-life balance is important, mental health is important, so look after yourselves. Thank you. Okay, enough about me. We're here to talk about tests. Now, we're going to make some noise again. Honest answer. Are you writing tests? I love it. You are the best, okay? You're just not using Playwright. Good. Okay, it's good. All right, so when it comes to testing, are there any problems with testing? Do you like testing? No. Who said no? Why? No pressure. They don't work. If you write the right tests, they work. Okay, anyone else not like testing? Any other answers of why they don't like testing? Flakiness. Yeah, flake is like the chocolate bar. That's the only flake I like. Okay, anyone else? Yes. The test is more advanced than the code. That's a great one. Amazing, yes. Anyone else? Okay, I'll give you a couple of answers that I have. Testing is hard, so that's kind of, what we were saying. It takes time to learn, which is kind of similar to is hard, but you don't have time to learn. You want to do sport. It takes time to build, right, on CI, etc. And it's like, oh, I've got to run all those tests. No, I just want to go home. And time is money, and your managers are saying, we need to cut costs, we need to get that shipped, so let's just not write tests. And we don't have a testing culture. Okay, so we should basically be writing tests as part of our application. Every time we're writing code, we should be also testing, and we're not. We do testing later. The product is about to ship tomorrow, and we're like, oh, we should write tests. Yeah? Kind of like your alt tags, oh, we should add alt tags. We should do accessibility now. It's like it should be done at the moment. So I'm here to change the culture. How do we do that? How do we get more developers to write tests? Do you have the answer? I love that answer, and I did not pay him, I swear to God. Anyone else have an answer? How can we get developers to write more tests? Give them more time, but they don't have time. They're already stressed out. That's kind of hard to do, They don't have the time not to write tests. I like that. Okay, well, I'm going to say that his answer is better. Just use Playwright. So we're going to go with that. Basically, Playwright testing. I like to say that Playwright was invented to make your life easier and to make testing easier. And that's the kind of the plan. Testing, reliable, so no flakiness for down there. Reliable end-to-end testing for modern web apps. And it works on any browser. So across all browsers, any platform, one API. Full isolation, what that means is that every test has its own browser context, which means nothing leaks from one test into another, which means less flakiness. Fast execution, Very powerful tooling, which I'm going to show you today, a lot of the tooling. And multi-language, in case you are a full-stack developer and you also need to write in .NET or in Python or Java, you can also write in those languages as well. So if you're across multiple teams, now you only need to learn one testing framework, and then you basically have everything. So that's kind of cool. And obviously, it's TypeScript first, but you can use JavaScript if you're still afraid of TypeScript. So I like to use the VS Code extension. Any VS Code users? Excellent. If you're not a VS Code user, there's still time. So you can install the extension. Make sure you use the verified by Microsoft one. Once you install this, you'll basically just go to the command panel and type in install Playwright. And what that will do, it'll give you the box here to choose which browsers you'd like to install in. Now, it doesn't matter what operating system you are on. You can be on a Windows and you can install Safari. You can be on a Mac and install any of them, right? So it doesn't matter. And at the very bottom, very important, is your GitHub actions. So if you're using GitHub and you want to add a GitHub action so that your tests are just going to run out of the box on continuous integration, you just have to click that box, and it just works. And I was writing the documentation for this. I was like, but how do they do it? What do they do? And they're like, it just works. Like, no, it can't just work. That has to be complicated. Come on. It's like, no, it just works. So yeah, this is how to get started. This is what you get. Very little in there, a little example test that I created to get started. And then there is a test examples with the to-do demo in there, so you can play with that in your own time. And then the config file. Again, we won't have to touch the config file much because everything pretty much works out of the box. But if you do need to do it, then that's already there for you. So how do you run tests? You can run all tests, a set of tests. You can run one single test, and all tests run in parallel for free. And it's super fast. So let me show you. So I'm going to use the VS Code extension. Again, if you're terminal people, you can just use terminal, totally fine, but it's more visual here. So I'm pressing on line 3, the green triangle, and as I press this, it's basically going to run my test. And it opens up a browser window, and that's it done. It's a very simple test, so you missed it because you were looking at your phone. But there you go again. So as you can see, I've got the box there clicked show browser. If you didn't want to see the browser, you could just unclick that, and then it won't show the browser. And that's your test run. Simple as that, right in VS Code without doing much. Now, what happens if your code breaks? Someone said that their code breaks, right? So live debugging, you can have error messages in VS Code itself. So in here, we're going to basically break the test. So instead of the selector get started, which is the button we clicked on, I'm just going to put the word star. And it's like failed, right? And it's saying error strict mode violation because it looked and it found 3 things with star. The GitHub star, get started, right? And then at the very bottom of the page, there's another one. So I can basically run this in debug mode. And what this does is now is showing me visually. OK, look, so I can actually see, if I don't like reading error messages, I can visually see what is there and what Playwright is trying to do. And it's like, I don't know which one you want me to click. What do you want? What do you want? Tell me what you want. So then you can basically decide, OK, this is the one I want. And then you can change that to the right selector. Gets like started there has 2. So that's going to fail because Playwright is strict by default. So you can see with Playwright, there's like too many. It's like, wow, that would never work. So get started is the one that works. And I can play around with that live, which makes it a nice developer experience. And then I can stop that, rerun it, etc. So locators, I showed you a little bit locators. You probably saw them there. That's what we use, and that's basically a way to find elements on the page. Think of the Google Maps where you just drop that pin. That's a locator. And it's got built-in auto-wait and retriability. So that means you do not need to set timeouts. It's automatically going to wait for everything, and it's just going to work. So locators look something like this. As I told you, they're strict by default. And you're like const get started, page.locator, and then we use our selector. Here I'm using a text selector. You could use a CSS selector. You could use an ID selector, a role selector. We're going to, in the next version, publish some more to this API. So it's going to be very much on par with the testing library API. So you'll have get by role, all that kind of like get by alt, get by ID. Everything that testing library has more or less, we're going to have the same as well. So that's kind of very cool. We're working with Ken C. Dodds on that, so very nice. Now, picking selectors, you're like, oh, which selector do I use? Do I use a get by role? Do I use a get by ID? Do I use a text equals? Do I use CSS? And it's like too much, right? Too much choice. So what you can do is use the pick selector box. So we pick a selector, it opens up the web page, and we can hover over, and you will see the selectors as I go down. This is an area label, a span has text, the span has text this, area label, and once we click it, it's going to put it in that selector box, and now we're ready to basically copy it or go, no, that's not the one I want, let's go back and pick another selector, and as we hover along, it will tell me the one I want. We can take that as a side one, and basically select that one, copy it, and then it would paste it into our code, and then we can run that test, and that test will obviously fail because I was just playing, but basically that's a good way of, picking the selectors you want. So make sure you're using web-first assertions. Basically, all assertions that we have in Playwright with the await expect locator to be checked. We've got a whole list of them there. To be focused, to be hidden, to be visible, to have ID, to have JS property, to have title, to have screenshot, and these ones will auto-await. So if you're not using these, then you're not getting the auto-await. So if you are using Playwright, make sure you're using web assertions to get that auto-await and retriability. So let me introduce you to codegen, right? We're going back now to how can we get developers to write more tests, and how can we make it easy, and how can we make it fun? Thanks to codegen, we're going to make it easy, and we're going to make it fun. Now, I love this little guy. He's not perfect. He does make mistakes, but he's pretty good. So this is codegen. In VS Code, I can click on that record new in the testing panel there. When I click on record new, what it does is opens a browser window. Now, if I go back to VS Code, it's opened up a new file, and it started to write my test for me. Great. Now I'm going to test the Nordic.js website. Woohoo. And here it's gone. Await page go to that website. Now I'm going to click on the header here, and it's put in header text Nordic.js. Click on the speakers. I'm going to click on the text speakers. You see how my code is being written. I'll go on to the sponsors. That's a scroll. It goes down to the bottom. I'll click the diamond sponsors there. Let's make sure that's there. And then I'll go back up to the top. And I'm going to click on the tickets. Let's buy some tickets. And now this is really annoying because they sold all the tickets, so I couldn't really fully test this. But they left a promo code there, so I can actually still do the promo code, and the button is activated. I can click on that. Couldn't buy the tickets. That's no problem. Let's close that. But ooh, there's a nice chat. Let's have a chat to the Nordic.js people. So we open up the chat. Now I'm in an iframe. I'm testing the chat, and I'm going to say, I'll be nice. I just say testing the chat. So in this iframe, I'm able to test this, and here this comes up. Now we wait for them to reply, and they didn't really reply to me, which is a bit annoying. And they kind of said, all right, send me your email. So I was like, OK, I'm going to fill in my email. And then I was like, no, I really don't want emails. So I'll just close the chat. OK, so what else can I do on this page? So let's also test down the bottom of the footer. There's some links to other domains. So the confetti domains, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to get a page that's going to show up. And it's got the general terms and condition for attendees. I know you all read this page. That's great. I'll just make sure that text is there. And the privacy policy, you probably didn't read that. That's fine. And then let's go to something else back on the same domain, on the first domain, which is the code of conduct. I know you all read that, so that's good. Make sure that's there. And there we have our test written for us. And here it is. And you wonder why I do 3 hours of sport a day. There you go. So that's my test done. And it's all written. And you can see, how cool is that? What do you think of codegen? Yeah, excellent. So as I said, codegen is not perfect, right? So this is I know some of you are going there, I write tests for a living, that's not a good test. And you're like, yeah, I know. So really what you need to do now is get your test and actually turn some of that into web-first assertions. So basically what I was doing was, I was clicking things that shouldn't be clicked, right? But that's because I was too lazy to later go and write that. So now I can change that click event to an expect and expect it to be visible, okay? So I can do all of those things that I clicked on that should be assertions as opposed to click. I can basically go down through that test, and each one, so we've got here, the diamond sponsors, that's not a click. I mean, a user might click it, but it's not really, right? So we want to just make sure that that heading is visible, and you can see that's the text selectors being used there. What else have we got? So down here, we've got the placeholder promo code. That was me testing inside that payment. So we can check all those. And then we can go down further. And you can see now we've got the frame locator. So that's the chat. So the intercom messenger is there. That opens it up. That has an area label send message. That looks good. We clicked on those. We filled it out. So that's using the .fill. And then we have the page, the frame locator, still going. And that fills it in so that you've got my name Debbie there. So it kind of shows that that's working with the dot fill. We'll continue down. Now we've got page 1. This is a bit confusing because page 1 is page 2, really. So page is the first page, and page 1 is the second domain that opened up. So that's the privacy policy page, right? So we'll expect that page locator of text general terms and conditions. We want that to be visible. Okay, so we'll just put an assertion there, and then we'll make sure that's visible. And you can see like it comes up what's available to you. And then we've got like the next one, right, page 2, which is the next page. And we're going to make sure that one, the privacy policy, is visible on the page. And this is kind of how I would do my tests, right? Now, you might do it differently. You might basically start just clicking and then adding in those assertions later. I like to click around and talk to myself and say, what do I want this test to do? And then codegen will create it, and then I go back over it and just kind of fix it up a little and make it better. And now I've got this amazing test. And obviously, I've modified it now, so I want to make sure it works. I can just press play and just check that that actually works. So codegen, or the test run, is going to run through it. It's going to open it up. It's quite fast. And now it's just a bit slow here because it's like waiting to connect to that intercom, right? So it's waiting for that iframe connection. Playwright will wait. It's going to go, you're not ready. Oh, you're ready now. And then it's going to add that in. I didn't have to do anything to get that to work. It just worked. And then I'll fill in Debbie. That was super fast. I opened up the other 2 pages and back on the first page. And my test is done. Nice, no? Yeah? Cool. So after this, we want to get a report of our test, because we might say, right, we have our test. Now we want to see, like, what's happening, so we can get this is the first time now I need to open the terminal. This is not built into the extension yet, maybe one day. But right now I need to open terminal, and I need to run the test, so with npx playwright test, and then I can do npx playwright show report. So now I'm going to get a report, and you can see it's running the test on Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit, and all of those tests have passed. The example test is first, and then that test that I created. So that report you can click in and kind of go further into. Then you can have the trace files. So from the report, I can click on a trace from the report if I set trace to on. What are trace files? I'm going to show you in a second. Trace files would normally, what we recommend is that it runs on CI, and it's already programmed to do that on the first retry if your test fails. So if your test fails, you're going to get this trace to be able to go back and forth through it. Although I quite like running it in dev mode as I'm playing around with things, because I find it's a nice tool for debugging. But again, it's expensive to run it all the time and save it. So this is why we recommend on first retry on CI. So this is what you get when you run the trace, when you open that trace, right? So we can open it from the report, and we get a whole trace of our test. So I can go along the timeline, and I can see absolutely everything that went on in every single second, on every single event. Scrolling along, I can see the state of the page at every moment. And I can kind of see what is going on, what happened. So imagine here if you had like some bug, something wasn't working. This is a great way to go through it. But it's also a nice way to visually kind of see in a slower mode, because playing that test is really fast. I can slowly see, I can see the animation coming in and there. I can see how long this took to go down. So I can see how I can improve that website a little bit as well. Here's my chat message comes up, and I can see that this connected. What did it do? Testing the chat. And then the next one was they replied, and they were like, send me your email. And Debbie's like, no, I'm not getting another email. So yeah, you can go through this. And you go back and forward, and you kind of see, look here, I'll slow it down. You can see it a little bit. There you go. And then you can go onto the next page. So you can see the way it goes down. The timeline goes down a little bit, and there's that blue page. So I'll just move the mouse down, and then I can actually visually see the other pages as well. So this shows me how I'm testing across multiple domains, which you could imagine testing using PayPal, for example. You might go to PayPal, test the PayPal payment, and then go back to your website and make sure you get that message, etc. So you can visually see what's going on at all times. So that's the third page there that I'm showing, the privacy policy. So that works. And this is like a image snapshot that you're seeing as I'm scrolling along, right? Now, I've got all the actions here, so I can go one by one through every single action, and then I can visually kind of see what's going on in that single action. I can see the before and after, what happened, what was the click event. So I can see everything that's going on. And this is actually a DOM snapshot, so this is not an image snapshot, this is a DOM, so you'll see it's kind of moving. You saw the little arrow moving there, right? So it's actually real time. So I can see there before and after, what happened. and it shows the time of each one. It also shows the errors there, so you can see. And over here, then I've got everything that's, this is expression to be visible. The text or the selector here is placeholder promo code, so I can see what's going on over there. And I can go through this in my own time. Now, this is a PWA. So this is something that if you failed on CI, for example, you can just send this as a zip to whoever is on your team and say, hey, look, this is broken. You need to check this out. And it's locally hosted. It's PWA, so it's not like nobody sees your code, so don't worry about that. And they can just spin that up and run that, which means that they can go through it and play around with it and kind of really understand what's going on. And you've also got the call, you got the console, so you can see if there's any errors in the console. You can see the network requests as well. You can see the source code as well, which means that, I don't need access now to the repository to actually see the code. I don't have to have that installed. And you can basically see everything that's going on. This also shows the metadata, so it will show also if it is mobile, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the trace viewer. It's very cool. I'll show you a bit more of it in a second. Because what happens when you want to test on mobile? So if I want to test on mobile Safari, I can just go into my config, and I can just add this. It's actually already there for you, just commented out. So you literally just go along and just uncomment mobile Safari. Now I want it to run on mobile Safari, and I can basically just run the test on mobile Safari. I can also do it in the VS Code extension just by clicking on a little arrow, and then you select to run that profile instead. So here I'm doing it just to get the report, and the test failed. So I was like, uh-oh, OK, the test failed on mobile Safari. Now, we won't blame Safari. It's not its fault. So what happened? So again, we could read all the log, and we can kind of see and understand what went on. Or we could open up the trace viewer, and we can kind of see if we could understand it a little bit better. So here, I'll open the trace viewer, and I can scroll along and see on mobile what happened. So the video is playing. OK, that's cool. And any ideas why it was failing? You're too clever. I didn't want you to answer that. What are you messing? So yeah, so sometimes it's very easy to understand what's going on, right? And here I'm just kind of playing around with it. But obviously, as you said, the navigation is not visible. And if you're a senior developer, you'd know that. If you're a junior developer, you might not know that. So you'd kind of go along through here and kind of, have a look at the selector. And it's telling you here in the log, right? The selector resolved to visible. So it is there, and it's attempting to click it. It's waiting for it to be visible enabled. The element is visible enabled and stable, but scrolling into the view is needed. It's done scrolling, but the element is outside the viewport. So Playwright is clever enough to know that it is there, it does exist, but it's not in the viewport. So if it's not in the viewport, the user can't click it. And if the user can't click it, Playwright won't click it, which means then this test is going to fail, right? So how do you fix this test? How would you get that test to work on mobile? Any ideas? Make a separate test, I heard down the back or something. That's too much work. I have to do 3 hours of sport. I don't have time to make separate tests. No one has an idea. Yes? Add another step. I like that. That's much better. I didn't hear down the back. I'm sure you said something very good as well. But we'll go with add another step. So yeah, we can add another step to the test. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to have a look here. And I'm just going to show you how you'd kind of figure out what to add into that step, right? So we can inspect this because it's not an image snapshot, it's a DOM snapshot. So we have access to Chrome DevTools, and we can basically go along here and see, okay, so, this is my label class. I can see that's the header nav link, what's in there. I can see where that menu comes up, right? It's out of viewport, so I can see that as a user, I need to click on that menu. Now, obviously, this is obvious, right? But if it wasn't obvious, you can kind of go through those steps and see, and then it's kind of clear, as in, I need to click that. How am I going to get to do that? I'm going to add another step, and I'm going to say, I want you to click the menu. Now, what happens on the other test? Is that going to pass or fail on the desktop? You don't know? OK. I thought you knew everything. It's going to fail on desktop. So we pass on Safari, we fail on desktop. That's not good. So no, it's actually very easy. And I only found this out 2 weeks ago, so don't worry. I'm learning too. So we basically put in an isMobile right into from the context. We have access to isMobile because in emulation we have access to that. And then we can basically write in, if it's mobile, I want you to go to the page locator, whatever that CSS class is, in this example, navigation menu or whatever it was, and then you just click that navigation menu. And then you'll continue with that has-text workshops, has-text speakers, has-text whatever is in there. So you'll just have to add that extra step, so you were very right. You add that step in for every time that user's going to have to click that menu, okay? And then only on mobile, Playwright's going to click that menu, and it's going to run that test. And there we go. We can test on mobile without having to write 2 tests. So running tests on CI, I mentioned, is very easy. It comes with the GitHub Actions, okay? And basically, that's all there for you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to even read this or understand this. It just works. And then once you have added that, it's just going to work on CI. You'll get something like this. So you're going to have fail tests, or you'll have the green tests if it works. And if it's red, you can click on the actions, and then you can basically see, okay, here's my failing test. That's that little Playwright report there. So I showed you the Playwright report. You can click on that, and that's where you get the trace, and then you're able to download that trace. You need Playwright then to open that trace, so make sure you're using Playwright to actually run it. And then you can visually see that trace, see what's going on, and play around with your tests. Another thing we have is component testing. Anyone testing components? Not enough for you, not enough for you. Okay, so component testing can be boring because you can't see what's going on, especially for unit testing. So I quite like using Playwright for my component tests and my end-to-end tests, because now I only have to learn one thing, and now I can visually see everything, which is much more fun. You do need to install the component testing, and it is experimental, so you know it's not 100%. Like there's probably things missing, and there's probably things that can be improved for sure, but it's definitely good fun. So when you're component testing, basically you can just like write your test as is and import that. So you can see it's even called experimental. So I'm using just view here, and I'm importing like the count from count as a count component, and I mount it. I expect the component to be mounted with the count, right? So then expect the component to contain the count as 0, and then I click it, and I expect it to have 1, and I click it, and I expect it to have 2. So a very simple test, right? And that's just the basic component that comes when you're running a Vue app. This works on Vue, on React, and on Svelte. And now I can see my component, and as you can see, the test works. But it's really ugly, right? And if I kind of go in here and inspect this, it's basically the component is being rendered onto a page with a div ID as root. There's nothing else there. So the component is being seen in isolation, and that helps you basically test your component in full isolation outside of your page environment. So if you're using that component across multiple pages, you get to see what it's like. Now your styles in this component, you can see that component is really ugly, and if you've ever used Vue or opened up this application, you know that component should be nice and beautiful, and that's because the main styles for this component are in a CSS file. So if we want to get those styles onto that component and see what it's like, then we can go into the Playwright folder and we can import the CSS file. Once we import that CSS file, now every component that we render is going to have access to this, because it's always going to read from this index.ts file. Okay, so only add in here kind of like your theming or something that basically is always going to come through from the application as opposed to at component level. So if I add this in, and basically then I go along and I'm going to run this test, and it should now work and look beautiful. And let's have a look, and ta-da! Okay, it's not very beautiful, but it's got styles, right? So that's basically how that works. And you can kind of run more than one component. So I can have 2 components, 3 components, 20 components, and side by side, I can just kind of go through these components and just visually open it there, click it. This one is just testing the prop, and I can run that, and I'll see this comes up with read and Playwright, and I can visually see it. So it makes it much nicer than actually writing unit tests, and you never know what's going on or what's working and what's not. So that's the component testing. Again, it uses Vite under the hood to serve and bundle it, and it's very much fun. It's much more visual to see when the test breaks what's going on, because you can see like it's missing something, etc. So Playwright testing, basically VS Code extension, codegen for auto-generate tests. We can run in debug mode. It's got locators and frame locators, show reports and show trace files, and auto built in for all actions. No need to set timeout calls. Tests run in parallel for free. You don't have to do anything to get that, which makes it super fast. Multiple browsers and devices. Intercepting requests, follows all redirects, it bypasses cores, and it manages cookies. So my only question for you now is, are you ready to Playwright? Yeah. Excellent. So Playwright is fully open source. It's basically Microsoft, but it's fully open source and it's community driven. So if you do have any questions, issues, or anything, go to GitHub, because we go through GitHub issues. We don't basically make someone more important than the other one. Everything's through GitHub. We have a Slack channel if you do have any issues with the community, like, you know, search on Slack and go through. We have a YouTube channel, we have Twitter, we have docs, and ask me questions on Twitter if you need anything. And come to me afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you very much. You've been an amazing audience.